America owes $38 trillion. That's the federal debt as of late 2025. The number is so large, it stops meaning anything to most people. Let me make it concrete. If you earned $1 every second, it would take you 31,688 years to accumulate $1 trillion. America owes 38 times that amount, $38 trillion in debt. And here's what makes it impossible. America adds roughly $2 trillion in new debt every single year. Every year. The government collects about $5 trillion in taxes. They spend about $7 trillion. The gap, that $2 trillion deficit, must be borrowed. So the debt grows and grows and grows. But debt is owed to someone. When you borrow money, someone lends it. When you take out a mortgage, the bank has that money. When you use a credit card, the bank is extending credit. There's always a lender and a borrower. So here's the question that seems almost too obvious to ask, but reveals something profound when you actually try to answer it. America owes $38 trillion. Who are they borrowing it from? Who has $38 trillion to lend? Who are these creditors keeping America alive, despite debts that should have collapsed any normal country decades ago? Think about that for a moment. I need to warn you about something. The answer is far stranger than most people realize. The mechanism that keeps America borrowing trillions without consequences isn't what economics textbooks describe. It's not rational creditors making sound lending decisions. It's a circular system where America borrows from entities that need America to keep borrowing, where the lender and borrower are sometimes the same entity, where money is created specifically to be lent, and where the whole structure works only as long as everyone believes it will keep working. Once you see how this actually operates, once you understand who's really keeping America afloat, you'll never look at the US economy the same way again. Let me start with the biggest creditor, because this is where the circularity becomes obvious and strange. The Federal Reserve, America's central bank, owns roughly $4.3 trillion in US Treasury securities as of late 2025. $4.3 trillion. That's about 11% of the total debt. Now think about what this means. The American government owes money to the American government's bank. The entity that creates dollars owns dollars that the government borrowed. But where did the Federal Reserve get $4.3 trillion to lend? They created it out of nothing, with keystrokes. Let me tell you how this actually works, because the mechanism is important. In 2020, when COVID hit, the US government needed to borrow trillions fast. Stimulus checks, unemployment benefits, business loans. The spending was enormous. They issued treasury bonds. But who would buy $3 trillion in bonds in a few months? The Federal Reserve did. They announced quantitative easing. Here's what that actually means. The Federal Reserve creates dollars digitally, then uses those dollars to buy treasury bonds from the government. The government issues a bond. The Fed creates money. The Fed buys the bond with the created money. The government now has money to spend. The Fed holds the bond. This isn't lending in any traditional sense. The money didn't exist before the Fed decided to buy the bond. It was created for the purpose of lending it. The Fed essentially printed $3 trillion during COVID and gave it to the government in exchange for bonds. And here's what's strange. The government pays interest on those bonds back to the Federal Reserve. But the Federal Reserve is owned by the government, so the government pays interest to itself, and then the Federal Reserve sends most of that interest back to the Treasury as profit remittance. It's a circle. The government borrows from itself using money it created itself and pays interest to itself, which comes back to itself. Think about that for a moment. Think about what it means that $4.3 trillion of America's debt is owed to an entity that created money specifically to buy that debt. But that's just the Federal Reserve. Let me tell you about the second category of lenders, because this is where it gets even stranger. Intragovernmental holdings, $7.1 trillion. $7.1 trillion. This is the government owing money to government agencies. Social Security Trust Fund holds about $2.7 trillion in Treasury bonds. Think about what this means. Workers pay Social Security taxes. That money goes into the